There was a time when drag racing felt wild, loud, and untamed. The tracks were filled with thick smoke, the ground shook from roaring engines, and fans packed the stands not just to watch cars race, but to feel something exciting and dangerous. This was the golden age of drag racing in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when personality mattered just as much as speed. It was during this unforgettable era that a young woman named Pamela Hardy stepped into a world she never planned to join and became one of the most recognizable figures the sport had ever seen. To fans, she would forever be known as Jungle Pam. Pamela Hardy did not grow up dreaming of fame or racing. She was a regular young woman living a quiet life, focused on college and everyday routines. She had no deep knowledge of cars, engines, or the racing scene. Drag racing was not part of her future plans. But sometimes, life changes direction without warning. And for Pam, that moment came in the early 1970s when she crossed paths with a man who lived his life at full speed. His name was Jim Liberman, but the world knew him as Jungle Jim. Jungle Jim was already a legend in the drag racing world. He was not just a driver. He was a performer. He believed racing should be loud, dramatic, and exciting. His burnouts were long and smoky, his style was rebellious, and his personality drew fans, and instantly, when Jim met Pam, he saw something special in her calm confidence and natural presence. What started as a simple meeting quickly turned into a life-changing connection. Jim invited Pam to join him on the road, and against all expectations, she said yes. Pam stepped into a racing world that was almost entirely run by men. The tracks were loud, chaotic, and demanding. At first, she helped with small tasks, learning as she went. But it did not take long for her to become an essential part of Jungle Jim's team. She packed parachutes, helped guide the car, and stood calmly on the starting line while engines screamed just inches away from her. Her confidence and focus made her stand out immediately. Fans noticed her before the media did. Pam's long hair, natural beauty, and relaxed confidence caught attention. But it was her professionalism that truly earned respect. She was not there just to be seen. She worked hard and did her job with precision. Soon, photographers and magazines began featuring her alongside Jungle Jim, and the nickname Jungle Pam was born almost overnight. She became a symbol of the wild drag racing era as her image spread across magazines like Hot Rod. Jungle Pam became more than a crew member. She became part of the show. Fans came to races not just to see Jungle Jim race, but to see Jungle Pam step onto the track. Together, they represented the spirit of a time when drag racing was loud, free, and full of personality. But behind the cheers, flashing cameras, and growing fame, a much deeper and more complicated story was beginning to form. One that would eventually lead to heartbreak, loss, and a life forever change. Life on the road with Jungle Jim was thrilling, but it was also exhausting. The racing schedule was relentless, with events nearly every weekend and constant travel across the country. Jim lived for the sport, and everything else came second. For Pam, the early days felt like an adventure. She had left college behind and stepped into a world filled with noise, movement, and excitement. Every track was different, every crowd loud, and every race carried a rush she had never known before. That Jim's personality filled every space he entered. He was charming, confident, and unpredictable. Fans loved him because he felt real and approachable. He talked to everyone, laughed easily, and treated each race like a performance. Pam admired his passion and creativity, and she supported him fully. Together, they formed a powerful partnership that felt natural on and off the track. To the public, they looked inseparable, but life behind the scenes was not always as exciting as it appeared. Jim's obsession with racing meant long days, little rest, and constant pressure to stay on top. He pushed himself hard, sometimes too hard. Pam often found herself balancing between love and concern. She cared deeply for Jim, but she also saw how the lifestyle wore him down. The endless travel, the noise, and the expectations never seemed to slow. As their fame grew, so did the attention. Everywhere they went, cameras followed. Fans wanted photos, autographs, and stories. Pam, who never chased fame, suddenly found herself recognized everywhere. At first, it felt flattering. But over time, the constant attention became heavy. People began to see her not as Pam Hardy, but only as Jungle Pam, always connected to Jungle Jim. The pressure affected their relationship. Jim could be warm and loving one moment, then distant and restless the next. Rumors began to circulate around the racing world. Whispers of drinking, late nights, and unfaithfulness. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories hurt Pam deeply. Still, she stayed loyal. She believed in Jim, his talent, and the life they had built together. Her loyalty became one of her defining traits, but also brought quiet pain on the surface. They remained drag racing's golden duo. Fans saw smiles, confidence, and chemistry. They did not see the arguments behind the trailers, the long silences during drives, or the emotional exhaustion Pam carried. Fame had magnified everything, including the cracks. Yet Pam continued to stand beside Jim on the starting line, doing her job with calm focus while the world watched. The racing world itself was changing. As the sport grew, rules became stricter and media attention intensified. The wild freedom that once defined drag racing slowly began to fade. Jim resisted these changes, refusing to slow down or conform. Pam sensed that something was coming, though she could not have imagined how suddenly everything would end on September 9th, 1977. The world Pam knew came to a sudden and devastating stop. Jungle Jim was not at the racetrack that day. There were no fans, no cameras, and no roaring engines. He was driving his Corvette through West Goshen Township, Pennsylvania, doing what he had always done, moving fast. Witnesses later said he tried to pass another car, crossed into the opposite lane, and collided head-on with a bus. The crash was violent, and Jim was killed instantly. He was just days away from his 32nd birthday. The news spread quickly through the racing community. For fans, it felt unreal. Jungle Jim had always lived on the edge, but no one expected his life to end so suddenly and so far from the track. For Pam, the loss was beyond words. The man who had changed her life, built her world, and shared every moment of fame with her was gone in an instant. There was no goodbye, no final conversation, just silence. Pam was shattered. Friends later said she could barely speak when she heard the news. The shock was overwhelming. Everything she had known for years, the road, the races, the crowds, was suddenly meaningless without Jim. Their life together had been intense, chaotic, and full of emotion, but it was hers, and now it was gone. The drag racing world mourned deeply. Tributes poured in from fellow racers, fans, and even rivals. Magazines that once celebrated Jim's wild stunts now carried headlines filled with grief. At memorials, fans shared stories of his confidence, his humor, and his ability to make racing feel alive. Jungle Jim became frozen in time as a legend, a symbol of an era that would never return. For Pam, the pain was private. She did not speak much publicly and did not try to explain her grief. The loss changed her completely. The sport that once felt exciting now felt unbearable. Every engine sound, every track, every memory reopened wounds that had not begun to heal. The life she had built around Jim disappeared overnight. That Jim's death also marked a turning point for drag racing itself. Safety rules became stricter, and the reckless showmanship of the early 1970s slowly faded. The sport moved forward, but Pam felt left behind. The world remembered Jungle Jim as a fearless rebel, but few understood what his loss meant to the woman who stood beside him through it all. After Jim's death, Pam quietly stepped away from drag racing. There was no announcement, no farewell tour, and no dramatic exit. One day she was there, and the next she was gone. The decision was not about anger or bitterness. It was about survival. The emotional weight of the sport was too heavy to carry without Jim. Every track reminded her of what she had lost. Pam tried to rebuild her life away from racing. She took small jobs and traveled a bit, searching for something that felt normal. But normal was hard to find. To the world, she was still Jungle Pam. People recognized her everywhere she went. Some wanted autographs. Others wanted stories about Jim. No matter how much time passed, she could not escape his shadow. Fame, which she never sought, became a burden. Reporters occasionally reached out for interviews, and while Pam agreed to a few, she kept them brief. She spoke kindly about Jim in the racing years, but there was always a quiet sadness in her words. Those years have been the most exciting of her life, but also the most painful. Rumors followed her for years. Some said she struggled financially. Others claimed she battled deep depression. Pam never confirmed or denied these stories. She chose privacy over explanation. What was clear was that losing Jim had taken a lasting toll. She had lived for years on adrenaline, and when that rush ended, she was left with silence. As time passed, nostalgia for the 1970s racing era grew. Fans began to look back with longing at the wild days of drag racing, and with that came renewed interest in Jungle Pam. Occasionally, she appeared at car shows or reunions. When she did, she was greeted warmly. Time had softened her, but her presence still carried the same calm confidence fans remembered. In rare interviews, Pam explained why she never worked with another driver. It was not only about grief, it was about respect. Drag racing had been something she shared with Jim, something that only made sense when he was there. Without him, continuing felt wrong. Their partnership had been unique, a one-time connection that could not be repeated. Despite her pain, Pam eventually tried to open her heart again. During her years in racing, she had met many people, including Fred Fry, a funny car owner and racer. After Jim's death, Fred understood her grief in a way few others could. Their connection grew slowly, based on shared memories and mutual respect. They eventually married, and for a short time, it seemed Pam might find stability. But life was never simple for her. The past followed her everywhere. People still called her Jungle Pam, and every conversation seemed to return to Jim. The comparisons were constant, and the emotional weight became too much. The marriage did not last. There were no scandals, just a quiet understanding that the past had not released its grip. Years later, Pam met Bill Hodgson, a man outside the racing world. With Bill, life was different. There were no cameras, no expectations, and no pressure to live up to a public image. He knew her simply as Pam Hardy, not a racing icon. Together, they built a calm, private life away from the noise that once defined her days. Over time, Pam began to heal. The scars never disappeared, but they softened. She reflected on how love had shaped her life, first through the intense bond with Jim, then through quieter understanding. She acknowledged that what she shared with Jungle Jim was a once-in-a-lifetime connection, something rare and powerful. Today, Pam Hardy lives a quiet, grounded life. She is in her early 70s and remains in good health. She and her husband enjoy privacy and simplicity, far removed from the chaos of racing. Pam never had children, and her life has remained focused on memories, friendships, and preserving history with care. Occasionally, she returns to the racing world for special events. In 2016, she briefly stepped back on the track at the NHRA Finals in Pomona, California, guiding a car once again. The moment was emotional and nostalgic, reminding fans of her iconic role. Pam keeps a minimal online presence and avoids social media. Her image lives on through old magazines, fan sites, and documentaries. When she speaks, she focuses on facts, not gossip. She refuses to sensationalize her life or feed rumors. Culturally, Jungle Pam remains one of the most recognizable faces of 1970s drag racing. She proved that impact does not require being behind the wheel. Her calm strength, professionalism, and presence helped define an era, though her life included heartbreak and loss. She carries her story with grace. In the end, Jungle Pam's story is not just about racing. It is about love, identity, and learning how to live after everything changes. It is a reminder that behind every legend is a human life, shaped by joy, pain, and the search for peace. As the years passed, Jungle Pam slowly transformed from a real person living a private life into something much larger in the public imagination. She became a symbol of an era that no longer exists, a reminder when drag racing felt raw, personal, and full of untamed energy. For fans who lived through the 1970s, seeing Pam's image brings back memories of packed tracks, loud engines, and a time when racing was as much about attitude as it was about speed. For younger generations, she represents a piece of racing history they never experienced but deeply admire. Unlike many figures from that era, Pam never tried to control or reshape her legacy. She did not write a dramatic autobiography or chase interviews to explain her side of the story. Instead, she allowed the memories to exist as they were, imperfect and emotional. This choice gave her legacy a sense of honesty. Fans felt that what they remembered about Jungle Pam was real, not staged or exaggerated for attention. In a world where many former celebrities try to remain relevant at any cost, Pam's quiet approach stood out. Her image continues to appear in documentaries, racing magazines, and online forums dedicated to classic drag racing. Old photographs of her standing behind Jungle Jim's funny car are shared again and again, often with comments filled with admiration and nostalgia. People talk about her calm presence, her confidence, and how natural she looked on the track. Many fans say she helped make racing feel more welcoming and human during a time when it was dominated by machines and men. What makes Pam's legacy unique is that she never positioned herself as a spokesperson or pioneer, yet she became one anyway. Without speeches or activism, she showed that women could have a meaningful role in motorsports without losing their identity or dignity. She worked hard, learned quickly, and earned respect in an environment that was not designed for her. That quiet strength resonates strongly today, especially as conversations about representation in sports continue to grow at AT classic car shows and racing reunions. Older fans sometimes approach Pam with emotion in their voices. They tell her about seeing her for the first time as teenagers, about how she stood out in a sea of noise and chaos, and about how her presence made the sport feel special. Pam listens politely, often smiling, sometimes surprised by how deeply people still care. For many fans, meeting her feels like touching a piece of history. Yet, Pam herself has always been careful to separate memory from myth. She has said in interviews that the racing world was exciting, but also exhausting, joyful, but also painful. She does not romanticize the struggles or hide the heartbreak. Instead, she speaks plainly, reminding people that behind the famous images were long days, emotional sacrifices, and real loss. This honesty only strengthens the respect people have for her. As time moves forward, the number of people who personally witnessed the wild 1970s racing scene continues to shrink. But Jungle Pam's image remains, preserved in photos, stories, and shared memories. She represents not only a partnership with Jungle Jim, but a moment in time when life felt fast, uncertain, and alive. Her story connects generations, linking the past to the present through emotion rather than statistics. In the end, Jungle Pam's lasting importance is not about glamour or tragedy alone. It is about authenticity. She lived fully, loved deeply, lost painfully, and chose peace when the noise became too much. That choice, quiet and firm, may be the most powerful part of her story. It reminds us that sometimes walking away is not weakness, but survival. Being remembered sounds like a gift, but for Jungle Pam, it came with quiet emotional cost that followed her for decades. While fans look back on the 1970s with excitement and joy, Pam carried those years differently. For her, memories were not frozen in glossy magazine photos. They were living reminders of love, loss, and a life that ended too suddenly. Every smile fans remembered was connected to a man who never came home. Every cheer echoed a time she could never return to. As the years passed, Pam became aware that people remembered only one version of her. To the public, she was forever young, confident, and standing behind Jungle Jim's funny car. That image never aged, never grieved, and never moved on. But Pam did. She grew older, quieter, and more reflective. Living alongside a memory that never changes can be painful. Fans expected nostalgia, but Pam often felt the weight of comparison between who she was and who people believed she should still be. This emotional distance made public appearances difficult. While she appreciated kindness and respect from fans, she also felt invisible as a person beyond the legend. Conversations often returned to the same moments, the same stories, the same questions. Where was Jim like in real life? Did you know how famous you were? Did you ever think about going back? These questions, though well-meaning, reopened wounds Pam had spent years learning to live with. Pam never blamed the fans. She understood why they held on to the past. The 1970s racing era represented freedom, rebellion, and excitement. In many ways, Jungle Jim and Jungle Pam symbolized a time when rules felt fewer and passion felt louder. People were not just remembering her. They were remembering their own youth, their own sense of possibility. Pam respected that, even when it hurt. What made her strength remarkable was her refusal to turn bitterness into identity. She did not lash out at the racing world or criticize those who still celebrated that era. Instead, she chose quiet acceptance. She allowed history to exist without trying to rewrite it. This choice protected her peace. By stepping back rather than fighting the narrative, she preserved control over her present life. Over time, Pam learned how to engage with the past on her own terms. She attended select events, spoke briefly when necessary, and avoided situations that felt overwhelming. She learned to say no without explanation. This boundary was not about rejection. It was about survival. After years of living inside noise and chaos, silence became valuable. There were moments, however, when memory brought comfort instead of pain. Pam sometimes spoke warmly about small details fans rarely knew. Shared laughs on long drives, quiet mornings before races, or moments when Jim was simply himself rather than a showman. These memories belonged only to her. They were untouched by cameras and untouched by myth. In those moments, Jim was not a legend. He was just a man she loved, times softened the sharpest edges of grief. Pam came to understand that being remembered did not mean being trapped. Memory could exist without control. The past could be honored without relived. This understanding allowed her to move forward, while still respecting what had been lost. It was a balance that took years to achieve. In a culture that often demands constant access and explanation, Pam's quiet dignity stands out. She never felt the need to justify her choices or narrate her pain for public approval. Her story remains powerful precisely because she did not overexpose it. By protecting her inner life, she ensured that what people remember is not just an image, but a sense of authenticity. Jungle Pam's emotional journey reminds us that fame does not end when the spotlight fades. Sometimes it follows quietly, asking nothing but remembrance. How one carries that remembrance defines the rest of life. Pam chose to carry it gently, without noise, without anger, and without surrendering herself to the past. Even many years later, Jungle Pam's story continues to speak to people in ways that go far beyond drag racing. Her life is often remembered for its glamour and tragedy, but the deeper lesson lies in how she handled both fame and loss. In a world that celebrates constant attention, Pam's choice to step away teaches the value of knowing when to protect your heart. Her story reminds us that strength is not always loud or visible. Sometimes, strength is simply choosing peace. One of the most powerful lessons from Pam's life is how easily identity can become tied to another person or moment in time. For years, she was known mainly as Jungle Jim's partner. While that connection was real and meaningful, it also made it harder for people to see her as an individual with her own journey. This is something many people experience in different ways, being known as someone's partner, child, or assistant rather than as themselves. Pam's later life shows the importance of reclaiming personal identity, even if it happens quietly and without public recognition. Her story also highlights the emotional risks of living in high-speed environments. Drag racing was thrilling, but it was also dangerous and unpredictable. The sudden loss of Jim showed how quickly excitement can turn into heartbreak. Pam did not deny this reality. She lived it. Her experience reminds us that behind every thrilling moment, there is a human cost that often goes unseen. This understanding adds depth to how we remember not only Pam, but everyone connected to dangerous sports and high-pressure lifestyles. Another lesson comes from how Pam dealt with public memory. She did not try to erase the past, nor did she live inside it. Instead, she allowed it to exist alongside her present life. This balance is difficult, especially for people tied to famous moments or tragic events. Pam's ability to respect her history without being controlled by it shows emotional maturity and self-awareness. It teaches that remembering does not have to mean reliving. For younger viewers discovering her story today, Jungle Pam represents a time when authenticity mattered more than branding. She did not carefully design her image for public approval. She showed up, did her job, and earned respect through presence rather than performance. In today's world of curated social media identities, that honesty feels rare and refreshing. Her story encourages people to value being real over being visible. Pam's life also opens conversations about grief and healing. Grief does not follow a schedule, and it does not look the same for everyone. Pam did not rush her healing or perform for others. She moved at her own pace, choosing privacy over explanation. This approach challenges the idea that grief must be shared to be valid. Her journey reminds us that quiet healing is still healing. That AS documentaries, articles, and videos continue to revisit her story. It becomes important to approach it with respect. Jungle Pam is not just a tragic figure from the past. She is a real person who lived beyond the headlines. Remembering her means honoring both her public role and her private strength. It means recognizing that survival itself can be an achievement. In the end, Jungle Pam's legacy is not defined by how it ended, but by how she endured. She loved deeply, lost painfully, and chose dignity over bitterness. Her story remains powerful because it is human. It reflects the beauty and fragility of life, the cost of passion, and the quiet courage it takes to move forward after everything changes. For those who watch her story unfold today, Jungle Pam leaves behind more than nostalgia. She leaves behind a reminder. Life can be fast, loud, and unforgettable, but peace, once chosen, can be just as powerful. As the story of Jungle Pam comes to a close, what remains is not just a memory of speed, danger, or tragedy, but a quiet legacy built on authenticity and resilience. While the racing world often celebrates loud personalities and dramatic endings, Pam's life reminds us that lasting impact does not always come from noise. Sometimes it comes from presence, grace, and the courage to walk away when the cost becomes too high. Jungle Pam never tried to be a symbol, yet she became one. She represented a time when drag racing felt personal, raw, and deeply connected to people who lived it. Fans remember her not because she demanded attention, but because she felt real. In the chaos of roaring engines and burning rubber, she stood calm and focused, offering a sense of balance in a world built on extremes. That quiet confidence left an impression that decades have not erased. Her tragic loss of Jungle Jim changed everything, but did not define her entire existence. While many stories end at the moment of tragedy, Pam's life continued, shaped by grief but not destroyed by it. She chose a different path, one of privacy, reflection, and emotional survival. This choice, often misunderstood, was an act of strength. It showed that stepping out of the spotlight is sometimes the bravest decision a person can make. What makes Pam's legacy especially powerful is how little she asked in return for what she gave. She did not seek fame, profit, or constant recognition. She gave her energy, loyalty, and heart during a brief but intense period of her life, then allowed herself the freedom to move on. In a culture that often refuses to let people change, her decision to live quietly stands as a reminder that growth does not require permission. Today, as new generations discover her story through videos and documentaries, it is important to remember the full picture. Jungle Pam was not only a tragic figure or a beautiful image frozen in time. She was a working professional, a loving partner, and a woman who endured deep loss with dignity. Her life cannot be reduced to a single moment or role. It deserves to be understood with care and respect. The lasting emotional power of her story comes from its honesty. There is no exaggerated triumph, no dramatic comeback, and no polished ending. Instead, there is acceptance. Pam accepted what she could not change and chose peace over public expectation. That message resonates strongly in a world filled with pressure to constantly perform and explain. For viewers watching the story today, Jungle Pam offers a rare lesson. She teaches us that it is okay to be remembered for one chapter of our lives while still living fully beyond it. She shows that healing does not have to be public, and that dignity can exist without applause. Her life reminds us that survival itself can be a meaningful legacy.